Welcome back, everybody. I'm here today with Dr. Anna Yusum for part 3 of our podcast interview, where we're going to learn a lot more about the work that she does and the impact that it has on people like you. So let me just start with the first line from her bio. We heard this in part 1 and part 2. Dr. Anna Yusum is an internationally recognized, award-winning, board-certified, Stanford and Yale-educated psychiatrist and executive coach with a private practice in New York City, Connecticut, California, and Florida. She's the best-selling author of Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. Welcome to part 3, Dr. Yusum. I couldn't be happier than to have you here with us again.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you for having me.
And in today's section, we're going to do two things. We're going to take a look at the work that you're engaged in right now, and then we're going to explore how our listeners and viewers can take some of the ideas that we've learned here and use them to make a better life for themselves. So let's start with some of the activities that you're engaged in besides the one-on-one work that you do in psychiatry. What are some of the other ways that you're taking your spiritual vision out into the world?
Definitely. So I am the Chief Medical Officer for a company called Conscious Health. And this is a company in Larchmont, California, right by Los Angeles, essentially, which bridges age-old wisdom, a psycho-spiritual existential program, together with modern science. And the modern science is ketamine treatment, neurofeedback, and transcranial magnetic stimulation. And we have a very special TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation protocol, called EMBP, electromagnetic pulse therapy. So it's a shorter treatment than the usual TMS treatments, and it's used specifically for brain optimization. So we have a lot of athletes come in. We have individuals also with mental illness, with depression, with insomnia, with autism, with ADHD. All those individuals will come in together with professional athletes to optimize their performance, together with actors and actresses. So it's a very powerful modality. I've done it myself, and I'm actually going to go back and do it again in 2 weeks. So this is one of the things I'm involved with, Conscious Health, and it's very exciting the direction this is taking. Right now, we have our first facility, which is in Larchmont, California, and it's called, and then we are going to be scaling it across the country once we perfect that. And so within the context of that, every client and patient who comes in is going to have this psycho-spiritual existential program that they go through as well, to help them with connection to others, with meaning making, with authenticity.
What is this session like? I'm curious. You said that you've done it yourself, so just take us through one of those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So the EMBP, it's a transcranial magnetic protocol, which is when your brain is stimulated with magnets in order for it to work better, essentially, or to be optimized. And all of us, as we age, our brains maybe, get a little older, the cells get a little older. And so maybe our brains in certain ways work better and in other ways they might not work as well. And so first, for this particular EMBP protocol, they will take an EEG, which is a scan, like a scan of your brain waves. And based on your EEG, they're going to create a protocol of magnetic stimulation for your brain. So transcranial magnetic stimulation is a very powerful treatment in psychiatry, and it's been approved for 5 things: for treatment-resistant depression, anxious depression, adolescent depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and smoking cessation. So this is for these specific diagnoses. But our product, it's not yet FDA approved, but we're working right now to study it at Yale and a number of other places in order to get FDA approval. But the TMS device is FDA approved. So this is an application of it using this EEG technology. So by virtue of this EEG technology, it's diagnosis agnostic. It's more based on the person and your brain, and optimizing your brain, as opposed to only treating certain diagnoses. So it's an upgrade that really expands the capacity for the use of this technology. And what it actually is, you go and you put a little magnet here, and the magnet shocks your brain for about like 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, and you come back for 10 days in a row. and then you feel optimized. You feel like a real improvement. I've only done, it's supposed to be 10 sessions. I've only had 4 sessions. So I want to go back to have the remaining sessions.
So what does it feel like sensation wise when the magnets are doing this action on your brain?
Yeah. Yeah. You just feel like a little like, like a little, like
Like
it almost
pulsing?
like, a pulsing, exactly.
Yeah.
Like a pulsing, but it doesn't hurt at all. And it's not supposed to hurt, but you will certainly feel it. You know that, the magnet is activated.
And while you're experiencing that, I mean, are you passive in the sense that you're just kind of sitting there observing what's going
Yeah,
on? I mean, or
exactly,
does it
exactly. You're
change your
passive.
thoughts in any way?
Well, down the road, that's the idea, that down the road it can, because it does indeed, like the indications for TMS are actually depression. And one of the symptoms of depression is that your thoughts could, you know, be very maladaptive in certain ways. And so, yes, it can certainly change the nature of your thoughts. And that's what we're hoping, that that's one of the things that will change. But there's so many other parts of the human experience that also could change, like your attention, your focus, your concentration, how well you're sleeping.
This is fascinating. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't speak for everybody else, but I'm certainly interested to want to find out more about this, which
Yes,
I
definitely. And
will.
and the thing is, it's not a very expensive treatment. I mean, it's for 10 treatments, $3,500, right? So it's not cheap, but it's also, as a one-time thing, not so horrible, not like unaffordable. It's not covered by insurance because it's not yet FDA approved, even though the transcranial magnetic stimulation protocol, the technology that it's based on, is FDA approved.
How long do the effects last for, would you say?
They think that it's a permanent upgrade, and people will
Okay.
get one 10-session treatment, and they can come back if they choose, but it's supposed to essentially just last and upgrade your brain.
And will you be bringing that to New York and other places?
Yes, I'm working on that, and I'm very much hoping to do that with my team. I have a team of, the CEO is Rabbi J.D. Kalmanson. He is the owner of Conscious Health, together with Elliot Liebhard. Um, so the two of them, the three of us, are doing this. And so Larchmont is the first place, and then we have a few other places, and New York will certainly be among them. And then we're partnering with Yale to study both this EMBP technology that I described, but also the psycho-spiritual existential model called the discovery model that we've also created in order to help patients up-level in that way through the direction of meaning making.
Wonderful. Well, that certainly is one example of a way that our listeners and viewers in the future can be engaged in what you've described over the course of our 3 sessions together. What about the average person in the street, though? A person who is watching or listening, maybe they've read your book, or maybe they haven't read your book. And a reminder, the book is Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. I'm wondering if you could give us maybe just a couple of takeaways from that and tell us, how can we use these principles of spirituality? I mean, in part 2, you described in some detail the structure of the book, which is brilliant in my opinion. What do we do with this? How do we live a better life, Dr. Yusem?
Yeah, it's a great question. What are the takeaways? And I think that the takeaways are different from every person based on what they need and based on who they are and where they are in the world right now. And I think some of the key takeaways are really about connecting to your soul and never. So essentially in life, we have the choice of going in one of two directions. It's living a life of comfort and complacency, or a life of growth and transformation. Two very different lives. One, you're constantly seeking to better yourself and finding opportunities to do so. And the other one is you ultimately just want to be comfortable and you want to have a really, really good life and be happy and not necessarily push yourself. And there's no judgment. It's not that one life is better than the other, but a life of growth and transformation is a different kind of life. And usually the people who will find their ways to my book are those people who are constantly looking to expand their consciousness, to improve themselves, to grow, to overcome their challenges, to identify the blocks in their life. And so essentially what this book does is it will help people to do precisely that.
So, what would be an example, or maybe a couple of examples of how you mentioned expanding consciousness, and a couple of the things that we've mentioned today and in previous sessions in passing were ketamine and ayahuasca. So, a lot of people are aware of the use of plant medicines as one way of expanding consciousness. And we see a lot of that in the alternative spirituality movement of today. What are some of the other means of expanding consciousness with an intention of growth and transformation?
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's a number of ways that we as human beings can expand our consciousness. I think some of it is through our own conscious choices, and like making certain choices to go against our nature and understanding what our default pathway might be in a given situation, and doing the opposite because it's harder, because that's how you grow. And when you go against your nature and take the more difficult road, that's really like the formula for growth and transformation. So one of the ways that we can expand our consciousness is through our conscious choices and deliberate intent. The second way is through, like you talked about, through these very powerful substances, because our conscious mind and our conscious will can take us only so far. And within our conscious intent, I also want to include meditation. There's so many people who've been transformed in their consciousness through meditation. And different people are different. There's also people who can meditate for years and have one ayahuasca experience that enables them to have what they would call as 10 years of therapy or 20 years of meditation. Like that certainly happened, and I've met many people and had many clients like that. So what an individual needs in order to expand their consciousness, I think, is very person dependent, and it's dependent on what you're open to. It's dependent on how your mind works. It's dependent on why your soul came into this world. But certainly those are three areas. One is deliberate intent. Psychotherapy certainly helps people expand consciousness. Meditation does, and plant medicine. And there's many, many more. Those are just a few. Breath work is another one, And then sometimes life will just happen. You'll have consciousness expansion. Having done nothing to ask for it or deserving, you'll have an enlightenment experience. And that can sometimes be terrifying and sometimes be completely invigorating and enlivening.
Well, we've also talked about narrative. I'll use the term narrative medicine, if I may. And we as human beings are fascinated by story. So there is the way that there are a number of ways that I use story, for example, in my work. So one is eliciting the patient's story. Second is engaging other people's stories to have an interconnection between those. And another way is using story from traditional cultures that describe how something changes. So through story, we open up the possibility of change. And when it comes to a person's individual story, of course, narrative medicine is taking a story that has been stuck for some time and putting on it a possible solution, a possible transformation, so that the future does not have to equal the past. So we're fascinated by stories. That's the point. And I would love to invite you to tell us a story about maybe a patient or client of yours or two that went from a problem state to some new life through any of the means that we've described here so far in a story.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
can you tell us a story, Dr. Yusum?
Sure. Let me think of a good story. I think that it's really like, I think about one patient of mine and how he has essentially, like, it's a patient who has a certain struggle, a certain addiction, and how he has changed the meaning ascribed to suffering. And the way that he changed that meaning was he did a Vipassana retreat, which is a 10-day silent retreat. And then he heard a lot of speeches by other people who've committed their life to meditation, realizing that those people who are the most spiritual people he's ever met still have struggles and conflicts. And this big conflict that was so central to his life that he needed to get rid of and he needed to figure out how to get beyond, suddenly faded into the background a little bit and became just one of the backdrops of his life. It wasn't as central anymore. It was still there. The conflict and struggle was still there. He still needed to battle with it in certain ways, but the amount of space it took up in his heart and mind became much less. So that's often what happens when you have these sorts of spiritual experiences.
And what would be an example of the way that you do your work with somebody who comes to you? So you mentioned earlier the two branches of psychiatry, one being pharmacology and second being therapy. And we talked about what they are, but just can you give us an example of what it's like working with you?
Definitely, yes. I have patients come for all sorts of things. People can come going through a life difficulty. They can come because they have a certain set of symptoms. They can be depressed. They can be anxious. They can have OCD. They can have insomnia. They could be going through a divorce. They could be wanting to grow. They could be, having done things one way their whole life and suddenly feeling like they want to do something different. And so I meet the person where they're at and I help them to figure out where to from here? What do we need to do to help you get to your next level? And for everybody, that answer is completely unique. And so my approach with each individual is completely unique. We use similar tools, psychotherapy, psychopharmacology, a lot of spiritual tools, and really figuring out what does the person need to get to their next level and be the best version of themselves.
Well, fascinating. I've really enjoyed my time with you, Dr. Yusem. I think you and I share a lot of similarities in our understanding of the world, of spiritual work, and what healing is really all about. And I certainly encourage our viewers and listeners to find out more about you. And if they want to know more, how can they find out about you and the work that you do?
Thank you so much, Bob. My website is www.annayusim.com. ANNAYUSIM.
So www.annayusim.com. Thank you so much for being with us for 3 fascinating episodes, Dr. Yusem.
Thank you, Bob. I so enjoyed it, and I look forward to meeting you in person at one of your temescals.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for listening.